Good morning, children of God. Well, you might be saying, Mr. Tenney, you look really tired. Looks like you just woke up. Well, I did because it's like the second day of Christmas break and I'm up at 6 a.m. Why is that, you say? Because somebody decided she was going to wake up early. Didn't she? She did. She decided she was going to wake up early. So, Avila and I here, as long as we're up, we're going to make a video for you guys so you can do well on this essay. So, anyway, here is the essays for the Unit 2.2 test. Now, if you go to the other review video, I already go over option A here. This is the challenge, okay? Just like I've done sometimes before, I'm giving you, this is the normal essay that most people will do, but if you've gotten an A or better on the previous test, then you have an option of doing one of these challenge essays, which might get you some bonus points or homework pass if you do really well. So option A used to be the essay question for everybody that I gave. So if you watched the last review video, I've already talked about option A, picking a crisis and so forth. Now, just one thing I want to say about that. Make sure when you give your opinion, you have to support it with evidence from church history, okay? So like a popular topic that people choose as one of the crises is like homosexuality, which is fine if you want to talk about that. And, so like, let's say you want to argue against the traditional church teaching. Say you want to say, well, the church should change its teachings. You can't just say, well, I think the church should change its teachings. You need to find something in church history that can support that, because otherwise you're just like starting something new. So you need to try to find things from scripture, from councils that you think could support that, okay? So that's what you need to do. If you're going to suggest a change to something, you need to find evidence for it within the tradition of the church. All right, and then when we get to class, and you guys turn these things in, we'll talk about some of those arguments and flesh them out and see what we think about them. All right. All right. Also for this, if you're doing option A, I'm pretty much letting you pick your own organizational style and method, but I give you some suggestions in the other video. All right. Let's go to this one because this is the one many of you will be doing. It says evaluate changes made by the Second Vatican Council to the Christian movement. To what extent have they been beneficial, and would Christianity have been better off without the changes? Okay, this is pretty much, excuse me. Well, anyway, this is pretty much exactly the same as the Constantine essay you did back in Unit 1.1, except I swapped out Constantine with the Second Vatican Council. Okay, now I've taught you two different methods of doing argumentative essays. The 5-paragraph essay, okay, which was what we did in Unit 1.1, and then the thesis antithesis, where you do the for and against and then argue why the thesis is stronger than the antithesis in Unit 1.2. Okay, so if I were you, I would go back to Unit 1.1 and Unit 1.2 and look at those rubrics and look at those essays. Okay, so this is Unit 1.1, where you introduce and then you give 1 change, 2 change, 3 change. That's the 5-paragraph essay model, and that would be one way of organizing it. The other way is if you go to Unit 1.2 test. Okay, introduction, you look at the arguments supporting your thesis, arguments against your thesis, and then your conclusion is no longer arguing why the thesis is stronger than the antithesis. Okay, so either one of those models is fine. You can choose which one you want to do. Okay, and then you pick some changes. Okay, so for help with this, you can use your homework that we did on Vatican II. You can use your textbook. You can also use this PowerPoint on Vatican II, these notes. This is notes 5. And there is also on my YouTube channel a video lecture. I think it's in 2 parts that goes through this as well. So if you're a little rusty on Vatican II, you might want to watch that again. Okay. Remember the 2 main themes were aggiornamento, to bring up to date, to make the church a dialogue, or help the church to dialogue with the modern world, and then ressourcement, which means to go back to the sources, which is to connect back to the early church fathers and the Bible and some early things. Okay, and then all right, so some of the things that are changed. They changed the liturgy to be more about the participation of everyone, to bring in the culture of not just Latin and Roman culture, but the culture of any culture, to emphasize that the church is not just a hierarchy, but also the entire people of God, and to focus on ecumenism, relationships with other religions, especially in that document Nostra Aetate, and to emphasize that all religions have truth, even though the Catholic Church has the fullness of truth. And it had just a more open attitude towards the modern world and embraced freedom of religion and conscience, which were previously kind of condemned by Pius IX in the syllabus of errors. This baby's trying to eat me. Anyway, so, and then you get to tell me what you think of those and whether they were good changes or whether they were not good changes. All right? And your textbook certainly has more, and you're certainly welcome to find more online. And I know many of you found other changes in that homework you did. All right, so we've done the main essay. We've talked about option A, although mostly that was in the previous video. And then this one is kind of interesting. This is probably the most challenging. Option B says your friend Cletus asks you why you believe in God when there's no proof that God exists. He says that miracles and personal religious experience are not proof because they can't be tested. He also says that Christianity includes many irrational ideas such as the Trinity and incarnation. Write a letter to Cletus in which you give a Christian response to his arguments, the idea of rationalism and empiricism that undergird them. Okay, so this one's a little more creative. Okay, you can organize it however you want, but it should be a letter, so it should start off, Dear Cletus. Okay, and you might think I picked Cletus because it's a redneck name, and I kind of did, but I also picked Cletus because he was one of the first popes. It was like Petrus, Linus, Clement, and Cletus. Those were like the first 4 or 5 popes, so I thought it was relevant for church history. All right, so sorry if you're offended by the word redneck. So the way you would answer this, I wouldn't do this one unless you feel like pretty confident about it and you're a philosophical thinker. Yeah, I wouldn't do it unless you're really confident about it. So, but you're going to have to review our ideas of rationalism and empiricism, which were in notes 2. So again, rationalism is the idea that the world can be understood by reason and using our intellect. And empiricism is the idea that the way you know truth is by drawing conclusions based on observation. So if I want to know something, I observe it, and then I see what happens, and if it happens repeatably, then I know something. And this is where the scientific method comes from. This is how we prove all sorts of things. You want to know if a cancer drug works, you test it out and see if it works reliably and repeatably. And this is, these are 2 of the most basic ideas that our modern world and our modern way of thinking are based off of, okay? Now, the Christian response to these, we talked about these in warm-up 4 and warm-up 5. We talked about religion and rationalism. And what I said in class is that religion is not irrational. It's not anti-reason, okay? But sometimes it's non-rational, meaning it's just the sort of knowledge that doesn't kind of make sense to the intellect. And I mean, like love. You think of love, loving another person and that sort of thing. Sometimes that's not always reasonable. Well, it's not irrational, okay? And then I introduced the idea of something that's trans-rational or supra-rational, meaning it's more than our reason can understand. Like it just recognizes the limits of human intellect, and there's some things that transcend human understanding, mysteries and paradoxes, and that's like the Trinity and the Incarnation and the Eucharist. And so basically what the Christian would say is that basically rationalism is assuming, in many cases, that something is false just because it can't be understood by us. Anyway, that's what that's one religious argument you could make. And then is religion empirical? Basically, a lot of times empiricism says, well, if you can't prove something, then it's not true. But what they mean by proof is, can it be observed predictably and repeatably? Okay, which God cannot be observed predictably and repeatably because he's a person. You can't. He doesn't obey the laws of nature that he made. So just like you can't really prove that somebody loves you empirically, it's like, well, he brought me flowers on, this day and that day, and he said he loves me on this day. Like, you can't prove it empirically like that, because people have free will, and God's the same way. He's a person, so you can't be like, well, we prayed for this person and they got better, and we prayed for this person and they didn't get better. You can't test that empirically, because that's up to God's will, and He knows. It's not something that you can count out percentage-wise. So anyway, and then talking about religious experience, we talked about the difference between objective and subjective. Okay, now empiricism can see the object, things that are outside of ourselves, and you and I can both see in the same way. Okay, the objective that happens the outside of the person. Okay, but it can't. Empiricism and rationalism can't really see the subjective, what happens within me. Okay, so again, like if I'm in love, you can't observe that directly. You can kind of observe some indications of it, but so religious experiences like that, like if I pray and feel like God has consoled me or spoken to me, I can't. You can't see that. I can know that, but I can't see that. So, and there's a whole Christian philosophy that John Paul II was big on, called personalism, which is based on phenomenology, which basically says that there's lots of. It argues that pretty much everything is subjective in some ways, because it's based on how you see it. So even if you're doing an objective experiment, you are seeing it as the subject, and so your experience of it is subjectively colored. So it argues that pretty much everything is subjective, which we talked about a little bit in class. I said, I'm actually more certain that God exists than the earth goes around the sun, because the earth goes around the sun. Well, it's been proven by science. I haven't proven it. I know that because I trust someone who told me. So I take that on faith, actually, whereas my experience of God is something I know in my heart, because I've seen it over the past, 15, 20 years of trying to be a good Christian. I've experienced Him in prayer. I've seen Him in the lives of other people. I've just seen the results in my own life and in the sacraments and different experiences and that sort of thing. So I know God firsthand, whereas I take most science I know by faith in people that I trust, or in scientists that I trust. So just because we can't prove something empirically doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just religion just exists in a different realm. It's subjective, whereas empiricism deals only in the objective. So again, what you're trying to do here with Cletus is you're not trying to prove God's existence to him. You're just trying to prove his attacks on religion don't really have the teeth that he thinks they do. That you can't prove God by empiricism, not because God doesn't exist, but because God is not empirical. So anyway, those are some of my ideas. I don't want to give you too much on that, because I want you to do some thinking, maybe some reading about it. Again, if this is just baffling to you, then pick another question. I only want you to tackle this if you feel like you got a hunger for it and a good grasp of it. Okay? And of course, you can always email me or come talk to me, and I'll let you know what I think about your thoughts, and I look forward to reading this. All right, so what you think? Is it a good video? Good video? Say bye to the people. Bye-bye. See ya. Nope, I've stopped. Stop it. Stop it. How do I stop?